Greetings everyone and welcome to Module 4. I think technically I was supposed to probably send this out Wednesday afternoon, but I know this week for many of you is crazy, so I thought I would give you a couple extra days just to get yourselves together. Please note that the work that I introduced to you today, if you could get that done by Wednesday, then that would be great. I know that we have a group project due on Wednesday. The dean will be there. But I'm hopeful that the last 30 minutes or so we can spend kind of unpacking some of the ideas that we talk about here. So again, some housekeeping items. Your commander's intent, which was something that Heath and Heath talked about in the Made to Stick book. Those should have already been submitted. Again, your group project is due this Wednesday, June 13th. Some of you will present in front of the dean and some of you will present after he leaves. Unless you all have some thoughts about this, I'm happy to pick group names out of a hat and see how that goes. Again, I'm looking at no more than 8-minute presentations, and I will keep you to that. So if you're under 8 minutes, great, but if you go over, I will cut you off. And if you want any feedback, please email me. I have looked at some of the group documents, and I've made some comments here and there, but I hate to make too many comments knowing that some of you may be going in anyway to make some edits. So just email me, let me know that you're ready for me to look it over, and I'm happy to review it for you. You'll find out in a couple of minutes here, or if you have been following the syllabus, you'll see that you also have some readings due, and I ask you to participate in a discussion board post reflection about one of the videos that I'm going to have you watch. And then we'll talk a little bit, or I'll talk a little bit about the final project that's due on June 27th. So the objectives for this module, I'm going to ask you to reflect on what we know so far about creativity and creative problem solving. Consider some specific questions for metacognition. We talked a little bit about metacognition last class, so I'm introducing you to some specific questions you can now ask yourself as you work through some of your projects. We did some lateral thinking tests in the last class, and so I'm going to introduce you to some creative measure tests and ask you to consider whether or not you think those tests are relevant and meaningful and kind of do the job, so to speak, based on what you now know about creativity. I'll ask you to identify some creative problem-solving solutions to educational problems, and I'll ask you to identify some requirements for the final project and then begin to brainstorm for that project. So to start, again, last week I introduced you, or at least I reintroduced you to metacognition and kind of this idea of thinking about your thinking as you work through your problems. I'm going to exit out of this presentation for a moment and bring you into our Moodle site. You'll see that we are in the June 4th through June 10th module, and if you click on metacognition questions, we can talk about metacognition from these three perspectives: content, process, and product. And I don't need to read through each one of these questions in each one of these categories for you, but I think that these are really useful, direct, concrete questions that you can ask yourself and that you can also begin to implement with your own students to have them start thinking about their thinking when it comes to what they're learning, how they're learning, and then how did they show that they learned through that product. We will talk a little bit more about this in terms of the final project. I don't ask you, or I didn't ask you to specifically address these kinds of questions for the group project, but certainly as part of this metacognition process, I'm hopeful that you can internalize some of these and use them as we move on through the rest of the course. Another part, or I guess another topic that we talked a little bit about last week were some of those lateral thinking activities. We did an activity around the hats and the baby falling out of the 20-story building. I'm going to show you today a chapter out of a book that specifically deals with measures of creativity. And as you can see here, I'm going to ask you to do this. I'm asking to think about whether or not you see these as relevant and meaningful measures of creativity, and why or why not. What have you learned thus far that supports your answer in terms of that? You don't need to write anything now, but I will ask for you to be prepared to discuss this at the end of class on Wednesday, or perhaps leading into the online session after that. Again, if we go into our Moodle site, you will see that right under the metacognition, I have the link here that says Creative Thinking Measures. And in this chapter, there are some very specific kinds of tests and inventories and surveys and things like that. And so as you can see here, the objectives for this particular chapter are that you can understand some of the creative process instruments and identify the creative people instruments. And what I'd like for you to do is give yourself some time to play around with some of these questions. For example, you'll see here that this is the Torrance test of creative thinking. You can get some information about these tests, and then you can also look at some of the sample questions that they offer. At this point, many of you have already really started to kind of latch on to these ideas of divergent thinking, convergent thinking, lateral thinking, that creative process thinking model, or the creative problem thinking model. And so I want you to kind of look at these assessments through those lenses and begin to question whether or not you think these are fair creative assessments. What is really being evaluated? Do you agree with the outcomes of these tests being able to tell us who's creative and who isn't? And whether or not you could see yourself using some of these assessments as part of your own teaching. Perhaps there are some, elements of some of these surveys or inventories that might be helpful for you and your students. So I wanted to share some of these specific instruments with you today. So as we move on, I'm going to ask you to pause for a moment at this point and think about what you know now in regards to creativity that you did not know just 3 weeks ago. Some specific things that you might think about include what the myths versus facts are, what are heuristic problems versus algorithmic problems, lateral thinking, convergent thinking, divergent thinking, and then even those elements of stickiness in terms of how can we make some of our ideas not only sticky, but also how can we sell them as being creative. So I'm going to keep going, but you can pause here for a moment and just do some reflection on what you know now that you didn't know at the start of the class. The idea here is that you have been reading, we've discussing, you're applying some of the principles to the group project that you're working on now, as well as some of the kind of smaller assignments that I asked you to do. This is all leading up to the final project that I want to introduce to you now, as really the course is almost, we only have about 3 weeks left. So what I'm going to ask you to do is think a little bit about some of the problems that you and your students face. This project will be completed independently, and it is meant to really get you thinking about your own problems that you would like to tackle and give some thought to. Often we go through our daily teaching and, we can get a little bit on a hamster wheel. So I'm going to force you to get off that hamster wheel, look at the hamster wheel, see where the problems are, and then we'll actually apply some of the principles that we've learned through the course to hopefully come up with some solutions. Before I ask you to really delve into some brainstorming activities, I want us to take a moment to watch a video that is kind of a solution that the Coachella School District in California came up with, or at least the superintendent came up with, to tackle this access of digital, or the problem of digital access. So again, if I leave out of this PowerPoint and if I take us into our Moodle site, you will see that, I've lost our Moodle site. I'm sorry. You'll see that our link, or the link to this particular video, can be found right underneath the inventory creative thinking measures. So here is a video. And actually you can click on this and you can watch this video. And again, it's a really awesome story about some really creative solutions. Once you watch that, I'm going to ask you please to participate in a discussion board. Oh my goodness, I keep losing all of my things. I'm going to ask you to participate in a discussion board about the video. We call it a discussion board at Towson. I assume it's something similar. You'll see that I have posted a couple questions for you to answer. So if you click on that right here, you'll see that after you watch the video, I'm asking you to share your thoughts about Coachella's solution to the school district's digital access problem. Yes, you can initially start off with some of your own personal thoughts, but in addition to those, I want you to show me that you can use the terminology and the frameworks that we've discussed to actually talk about this issue. This terminology might include the types of problems that were addressed, the elements that made the solution creative or sticky, and how you believe that thinking skills model might have been applied. I'll ask you to post an initial comment by June 13th, and then you'll have until the following Sunday, the 17th, to respond to at least 2 other people's posts. That will get us thinking a little bit more about school-based problems. I know that some of you decided for your group project to deal with other types of problems, which was great, and it should be fun, and it should be something that is enjoyable and humorous potentially. But for your final project, I'm asking you to pick something that is really about you, about your school, about your classroom, and something that you would love to actually see fixed. And this is where I'm going to ask you to start brainstorming. What are some of your own school-based problems? This is the personal problem-solving project. It is due on our very last day of class. There is a write-up about it in our syllabus. And so what I'll ask you to do is start thinking about something that's troublesome, problematic, or in need of improvement that potentially impacts your own students and your school. If you take a look at the Puccio book on page 89, we can go right into this idea of applying creative problem solving to our personal world. I think that's chapter 10. And on that page, the idea is how can we assess the situation? So I would encourage you to actually go through some of these activities, including making a list of possible situations, and then from that list selecting something to work on, verifying that it fits the criteria, again, offered on that page 89. Once you identify a solution, you're going to take a couple weeks to read and study and research the problem. How are some other people tackling the problem? And then eventually you're going to come up with a solution that is original and workable for your target audience, which you will identify who that audience is, whether it's you, your students, your parents, or your administrator. On our final class period, you're going to share that problem and the innovative plan, the pitch, the prototype. Again, this is very similar in some ways to the group project you're working on now. However, this is an independent project. You'll prepare an executive summary, and I will provide you some more details about that by Wednesday or Thursday morning. And in that summary, you'll briefly describe the problem and the concept for your solution. Much like the group project you're working on now, I don't expect you to come up with a full-blown solution or prototype. However, I do expect you to include some supporting documents or charts or tables that would emphasize your solution's power and potential. So that is it for now. I hoped to keep this presentation under 15 minutes, which so far I'm good. As always, if you have any questions or comments, you can email me or text me or call me. I really look forward to seeing you and hearing from your group presentations on Wednesday. And I think that's it. I know many of you are on your last couple days here before summer break. So I wish you all a happy, healthy, and safe end of the school year. And I'll see you in a few days. Take care. Bye.